Hi, welcome to part 2 in a 3-part series, Wellbeing Around the World. I'm Kathy Hagen, Head of Business Operations for the Eden Alternative, and this show features Rayne Stroebel, Eden Alternative Regional Coordinator from South Africa. For our audience, if you have questions throughout the show, please put them in the chat box and in the comments box, and we'll try to get to them. So today we're going to focus on the three of the Eden Alternative domains of well-being: identity, security, and autonomy. And before we get started on this, I'm sure that everyone is curious to learn a little bit about the care system in South Africa and how you're doing through the pandemic, Rayne. So first, how are you, Rayne?
Kathy, what a wonderful privilege to be with you.
Yes.
I'm good. I've just done a 3-day associate training, so I'm a bass baritone suddenly. I'm not used to talking for 3 days, and I realized I obviously talked too much in the associate training that my voice is gone. But I'm good. I'm in Johannesburg. It is spring in South Africa. We just had the first torrential storm up here. The earth is sighing a sigh of relief with the water that it received. And yes, all is good. Life is beautiful.
Good. And what would you like the world to know about elder care in South Africa?
You know, whenever I have the privilege to speak to an international audience, now that we can't travel, it's more difficult. But I always started my presentations at international conferences saying that we have the best caregivers in the world. We are so blessed. And as you would know or not know, 98% of elders living in long-term care in South Africa are white, and 99.9% of our caregivers are people from African or non-Western descent, indigenous people. We have a problematic care system, which that already explains one of the challenges. But also COVID has certainly put a different spin on things, that people have suddenly become very hesitant about moving into long-term care. We've had severe lockdowns, lockdowns that really made me question the fact that it verged on being human rights abuse. Some people who have been in what I would call solitary confinement for 18 months. So yes, we can look at the negative side of it, but I think COVID has been an incredible gift to the long-term care sector, in that people out there suddenly realized what it is like to be locked in, realized what loneliness feels like, this helplessness. And especially in a country like South Africa, you know, we don't take things lying down. We say it as it is. We have incredible entrepreneurs and activists in this country. And suddenly people have realized that this is not a life worth living. So I think the negative fallout on mental health challenges is massive. But the gift is as massive, to re-look at this system that we created, this institutional system. And in my 3-day training now, I sensed an incredible new energy. While most long-term care facilities are in dire straits financially, we sit with a 30-40% occupancy in many of the homes. There is a new energy, there is an awakening, there is a sense of urgency, of activism, of saying, no, we cannot carry on. The South Africa, the people's eyes have opened to say there must be a different way. And this, of course, you know, is right up our street. I'm in heaven when people say, no more, let's change. And this group, from a large organization, 25 people, there was just such a wonderful new energy. So yes, things are dire, but there is wonderful hope that the time is right for us to change.
And through COVID, how did Eden Alternative communities, the communities that are actually practicing the principles, did they fare differently than the people that are not, that were in using the institutional models?
Of course, I would like to believe that. And on many levels, what we saw in the homes that are on the Eden Registry in South Africa, we saw a difference. We saw those homes actually filling up almost immediately. Homes in villages right, in the next village, still sit with a 30% occupancy. So, yes, I think our long-term investment in deep organizational transformation has paid off during COVID. I'm not minimizing the impact that it's had on our Eden Registry homes. Not at all. It was very difficult for everyone. But the one of the most remarkable things for me, Kathy, was right in the beginning when we started talking about a lockdown. Um, our care partners just putting up their hands and say, "It's fine, I'll stay in." And we would say, "But you're a single mother. You have not got the support system at home." And they'll just say, "I live in." Some of our employees lived on site for 3 months, literally
Wow.
3 months of being locked in. And these are
Mhm.
single mothers. Yeah, it was remarkable to see the spontaneous response of, "I'm here for the elders."
Mm.
It has been an incredible experience to witness this. Uh, our elders in these homes, um, I saw a difference. I really saw a difference, and I don't have evidence. I obviously only know what happened. Um, Not only I know what happened in other homes as well, and I saw a lot of a different attitude amongst both elders and care partners of the homes that are on the Eden Registry.
That's great. And let's talk about well-being through all of this. How do the Eden alternative domains of well-being resonate in your part of the world?
I think that in a country like South Africa, where I mean we lived through a history that has so affected well-being, so affected identity, and meaning, connectedness, that it really, really resonates with our care partners when we speak about well-being.
Sure.
The institutional narrative is there, but I find an openness, a willingness, an understanding, and I find it particularly amongst our um, care partners, direct care partners, um, in that this is what they've been waiting for generations. During apartheid, people just had no sense of well-being. There was no sense of identity. They were not recognized as citizens.
Mm.
So this just resonates so well with people that let's have a different discourse. Let's create a different story. Let's move away from what is wrong to how we can create a life worth living for ourselves as much as for the elders.
And what is right with the world, right? Yeah,
Yes,
great.
yes.
So I know that you have very strong feelings about the domains of well-being. I know that we've seen them, we've all seen them ranked in some kind of order or comparing them to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And for people that aren't familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm going to show a little diagram to remind you. It's about self-actualization. And Maslow's theory was that you needed your physiological needs met, and your safety needs met, and your social and esteem needs met before you could reach this self-actualization. And the domains of well-being have been ranked in order similar to this, with joy at the top. The domains of well-being being the identity, connectedness, autonomy, security, meaning, growth, and joy. And people have put identity and security at the bottom, similar to this. And I'd like to hear your take on this way of thinking about the domains of well-being, Rayne?
So I think we have to put this into context that firstly, Maslow created this after the Second World War. So
Mm-hmm.
Maslow was 1943 to 1940, 54, around about there. And that most of this research was done in the Northern Hemisphere. And interestingly enough, on older Caucasian men. So this research is very old, and it's very Western. And simply in our world, in the majority world that we live in South Africa, I can't find that it is applicable. The domains of well-being is an intricate root system. It's like a rhizomatic root system. You know, when you look at the root system of a bamboo, it's not a straight root system. It's not linear.
Right.
Um, we have the saying in South Africa, or amongst certain of the indigenous people, this thing called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu says, "I belong, therefore I am."
Mm.
Bishop Desmond Tutu said, "It is not I think, therefore I am. It is because it is I belong, therefore I am." So it's a circular, connected, interconnected. Um, in my research, I looked at interconnected or interdependent reciprocity. The Western world has become obsessed with independence, and I made myself guilty of that for many, many years,
Sure.
thinking that the quality of life of older people equates to independence, especially
Mm-hmm.
independence in activities of daily living. And I think that notion and the misunderstanding of Jung's individuation, that it's all about me, 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 and we've created a world in the Western world that it's all about me, 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 is a total misconception. Individuation is becoming more of who you are. It's not becoming more divorced from community. We are part of a very intricate ecosystem. We literally feed off one another, not as human beings only, but in nature. You know, we are certainly not the jewel in the crown. You can just look at nature and know that um, we've got a lot to learn. But this interconnectedness, this rhizomatic interdependence, is for me indicative of how the domains of well-being work. There are multiple entryways. It is not starting with one that will lead to the other. One will affect the other. And I also query whether we could give well-being.
Mm. Good
I
point.
I really have my doubts that, and I think it's very arrogant of us to think that, we can give people well-being. Like we
Right.
allow residents, we allow residents to keep pets. That implies a very, very dangerous power imbalance. I query the word care because care implies a power imbalance. I'm superior to you. I have the magic wand to cure you. Where when we look at the interdependent uh, reciprocity of the domains of well-being, we see how one affect the other, and all we can do, and this is what principle 2 of the Eden Alternative says, is we can create a human habitat, and we can
Mm-hmm.
create a relationship directed support habitat.
Yes. And care partnership, right? Care partnership with the focus on the partnership, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we've made ourselves guilty in this country because many of the care homes are NGOs and not for profit, to do charity to one group of people at the expense of another group of people. So the domains of well-being are not something that we can give elders. The
Right.
domains of well-being is a human habitat that we create that has the same effect on everyone in the care partnership team, from the person who cleans the room to the person who serves the food to the elders. It is that intricate, interdependent connection.
So I want to show everyone this drawing that you created that shows all of that in a graphic. It's a flip chart. It's simple, and it's really cool because the arrows are going everywhere. So you're showing that interconnectedness of people and all of the domains of well-being. And that, can you explain this and share a little bit about how this came to be?
So yeah, this is my working document when I present workshops, and I think what it illustrates is that, there is not an order of importance, and the multiple entryways, and how, you know wherever you start, it's often very easy to start with something like identity, but a sense of identity can enhance a sense of security, and a sense of security can enhance a sense of autonomy, and so on. So I think it is this, again, this reciprocal affectedness of the domains, that you can literally start with any single one of them and build on, when you get to know someone, and you get to know what gives that person, or where does that person's sense of security lie, or their sense of meaning, and when you expand on that, it automatically flows over to the other domains of well-being. um, so yeah, I think this is what I try to illustrate with this flip chart, is that they are in no particular order. There are multiple entryways, and that one aspect can actually enhance or affect other domains of well-being, and it literally is, that there's this little spark that then lights up. It's like new neurological pathways forming in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it can happen. It's like the neuroplasticity of the brain. We can enhance and grow the domains of well-being through individual or different entryways.
And you were telling me a story about exactly why the hierarchy doesn't work. You had a story about a care partner that came to work, and you asked him how his day was, and he was just so happy and filled with joy. And tell me about that story, because you knew where he lived.
So the reality of the employees in South Africa is that the majority of them live in what we call informal settlements and informal dwellings. Um, in the in the area where I live in Hout Bay, there is an informal settlement, Imizamu Yetu, that has very, very little services in terms of ablution, public toilets. Not a single one of those dwellings would have an ablution system, a flush toilet in them.
Mm-hmm.
When it rains, like the type of storm that we had now, uh, those informal settlements are often flooded. In winter, we have terrible, terrible fires from kerosene lamps or paraffin lamps in those informal settlements. In spite of that, our employees arrive at work at 7 in the morning, and believe it or not, in South Africa, um, all the care homes that I work with still work on a 7-7 shift, so 12-hour shifts. And I often see employees walk to work in the morning, because we also have a very, very almost non-existent public transport system. So people would leave home at 4 in the morning, take a taxi, take a bus, walk for miles in the middle of the night in winter. Um, and I presented this care partner workshop up in KZN, and I arrived with a group of care partners just singing at the top of their voices and dancing. And everyone came, what is going on there? This is the spirit of Ubuntu. And this particular individual, I asked him, "How are you?" And he says, "I am so good." And I think, how is that possible? I
Mhm.
also came to work this morning in my car, had a hot shower, had an espresso coffee, and I can't categorically just say, "I am so good." And that is what you hear all the time. So when we look at Maslow, and we look at the lack of security, the lack of physical needs being met, and you look at the joy and the the meaning that individuals carry within them in spite of, that is when I question this hierarchy, and that I think there is something that we miss. And this is what I discovered in my research, is that there is a different aging, there is a different being in the world, that is not always, and I'm not minimizing poverty, I'm not minimizing the hardships of people in this country as a result of apartheid, but there is a different story that is being told. And I don't want to use the word narrative, because that is also part of this, um, hegemonic world that we live in. There is a different story happening here. And it is a story of well being, it is a story of connectedness,
Mhm.
whether it is spiritual connectedness or cultural connectedness. But there is a different story being told, and that story is one that we should pay attention to and really find out, how is this possible?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And with the lack of security, right? So how do you define security in South Africa? How do the people define security?
I mean, Kathy, yes. When you
Yes.
look at security, let's look at security of tenure. I did my research in a little fishing village where people who lived there were forcibly removed from their properties between 1950 and 1958 under the Group Areas Act under apartheid in South Africa. The
Mhm.
irony is that the properties where they lived is where I now live. So I go into this village to do my research to find out that the people I listened to lived where I now live, and they were forcibly removed to a very uninhabitable part um, of Cape Town. The men all became fishermen. The women mostly left school round about the age of 10, became domestic workers, and round about the age of 16, they all started working in the fish factory.
Mhm.
When they were moved there, they were told that the properties that they were given, and these were like council house flats, apartments
Mhm.
without bathrooms. So they
Oh
had
my.
outside toilets that was, a hole in the ground, and there are still a lot of them. That these properties would be put in their name. It's now 2021. Those properties are still not in their name. So,
Mm.
from a security point of view, there is no security of tenure. Most of these people never had security of vocation. They did informal work because they were, so-called unskilled laborers. There was no security of a pension. There's no such thing as retirement. It's a concept that doesn't exist because, they just have to keep on.
Right.
And yet, in spite of the security, in spite of living in an area that is rife with crime and gangsterism, there is a different kind of security, and the security of connectedness lies in intergenerational being, where four generations live in one home, um, even though that home is not in their name, and that home is very small, and many of them still use the outside toilets. There is security in intergenerational connectedness. And that intergenerational connectedness not only brings security, but a different sense of identity. You know, the storying is not, there is no reference to people being old or retired. There is very little ageism there because older people have such purpose. There is
Mhm.
such meaning in their lives. You know, they are the ones providing for the grandchildren. They are the ones walking the grandchildren down to school because it's simply too dangerous for them to walk alone. So there is a complete different take on what does security mean. Security is is not about, you know, owning the roof over your head or having a pension or a provident fund. It is about something deep inside that makes people feel connected and gives them a different sense of identity and connectedness.
So we have so much to learn from them. Oh my goodness, here. Everyone in the Western world, right, has so much to learn from that. Imagine if we had all of that together, you know? That's
Mhm.
it's amazing. It's beautiful. Thank you. Um, how do you help people describe their identity? I'm moving to the next domain of
Mhm.
well-being for us. How does focusing on identity help make things better for people? And I'd love another story if you have one.
So I have a very fresh story. We arrived at this retirement community where we did the 3 day workshop. And there is a lady working in the kitchen that's going to look after the teas and the coffees and the lunches. And I
Mm,
go up to her and I say to her, "Hi, my name is Rayne. What is your name?" And yes, she's wearing a mask, but this is a part of our legacy. She tells me her African name, and
mm,
the African name, of course, falls very difficult on my ear. I am, you know, hard of hearing. She is wearing a mask. And I say to her, "Sorry, can you repeat that?" Um, and she said it again, and I still didn't get it. And the third time she said, "Oh, it's okay. Just call me Grace." Now, this is something that we've inherited from
yes.
apartheid, that it's so difficult to pronounce for us white people to pronounce some of the African names, that white people just started giving black people the name of Rose or Princess or Grace or Beauty. And to
Mhm.
this day, you know, people carry that name. And I said to her, "No, I really want to know what your real name is." Um, and then when I asked her the meaning of her name, uh, and her name was Nhlatuit, Slatuti. Uh, I mean, as I say, 3, 4 times it took me, and then she explained to me the meaning of her name, and I just stood there in silence, thinking, you know, the sins of the fathers in the third and the fourth generation. How are we going to get rid of this? To celebrate, and we do celebrate cultural diversity, but to really go a level deeper where we can respect identity, and that identity comes with a cultural meaning and a very, very deep cultural and spiritual connectedness, and to
Yes.
build bridges between, you know, people of different cultures in this country is, you know, 25 whatever, 26 7 years after apartheid, still difficult. So while it's challenging, it's also very, very exciting, that suddenly people start learning the different language. You know, we have 11 official languages in South Africa.
Great. That's
Those are just the
amazing.
official ones, yeah.
Yeah.
And in every language, people have different names. It's like the names in Iceland. You know, they're very particular to that culture.
Hmm.
So yeah, as we know, identity starts with that, but it goes so much deeper to cultural identity and cultural meaning and cultural expression. And you know, different cultures have different forms of showing respect. So identity is problematic, but it just gives us such incredible opportunities to connect when we really, really explore different levels of identity.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. And we talk about becoming well known, and boy, how can you become well known if people don't know your name? I mean, that's just crazy. It
Yeah,
doesn't make any sense at all, right?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's wonderful
So,
to see the Vikings are listening.
ah,
Yeah,
Karen is in Denmark. Nice,
so
very nice.
wonderful.
Karen, hi, Karen. Okay, let's look at autonomy. I know it's your favorite. I saved it for last. Um, Autonomy is very meaningful for you. And so give me your definition of autonomy. You know, a lot of people simplify autonomy to mean choice. And I know that that's just a tiny bit of what autonomy is about. So rain in the trees there. You look so great in that tree.
Yes, I think we obviously, and it's it's a natural tendency to want to simplify things, and
Yeah.
that autonomy for many people have been reduced to chicken or beef.
Right.
And we think the more choice we give people, the more autonomy they have. I personally don't think choice has anything to do with autonomy.
Hmm.
Um, Again, I've worked in homes in rural South Africa where literally Mseni near Rorke's Drift in KwaZulu Natal, um, a home with 60 elders, has not had running water for 18 months. Now, I don't want to paint this picture of poor Africa and how terrible things are here. On the contrary, I celebrate the incredible, and I'm hesitant with the word resilience as well. Uh, but for instance, I spent time in this home, and I went into the kitchen. I always find my way to the kitchen because that's where I belong and where I feel safe. And I started talking to one of the employees in the kitchen, and we had a long discussion about cultural food. And she was telling me that they have one cultural day a year because the Department of Social Development prescribes a menu. I'm like, you have one cultural day a year where you can be African? And for the rest of the time, you have to eat the food of white people. And this long discussion. And eventually, I moved on after a wonderful discussion, only to find out that this person that I was speaking to, who I thought was an employee, was actually one of the elders. But
Oh,
more than that, she was an elder living with dementia.
yeah,
But she was working in the kitchen. She
great.
was she was meaningfully engaged in the kitchen, and had such an incredible sense of autonomy in that she had agency. So
Yes.
my definition of autonomy is when a person has agency, and agency means that I can affect change.
Hmm.
So agency is something that is inherent in all of us. We all want to be significant. It
Right.
doesn't mean that we all want to play bingo, or that we all want to participate in activities, or that we all want to have a choice between chicken and beef. But it means that I have a standing. Tom Kitwood talked about personhood, but sadly, I think Tom Kitwood just died too young, that he never could um, expand on his concept of personhood, because they talked about a standing, which to me is very static, whereas agency means that I can bring about change, I can grow, I can affect change, um, that is meaningful. So when we really look at deep organizational transformation and bringing decision maker closer to the elders and those who know them the best, it is not about giving them choices. It is about giving them agency
Right.
where they can affect change. And that can be a simple change, or a deep organizational change, or a physical change. But 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 it's a distinct difference between giving people choices and creating an environment where people feel that they have agency. Now, The other interesting about autonomy, like so many of the domains of well-being, is that we cannot give people autonomy.
Right.
It's not ours to give. And it's a very arrogant perception that we have, that we can give people autonomy. We can give people choices. But as I've explained now, that doesn't equate to autonomy. What we can do, it's the same with brain cells. We can't create new brain cells, but we can kill brain cells.
Hmm.
The same goes for autonomy. We cannot give people autonomy, but we can erode autonomy. And again, that goes back to creating a human habitat where, life revolves around authentic, meaningful, close relationships. And those relationships bring about the domains of well being. And then we can create an environment in which people feel
Right.
autonomous
Yes.
and agentic. Uh, so it's not something that we give people, it is something that is there, that is either nurtured or destroyed, eroded.
So with all the distancing and lockdowns, how is autonomy affected, and how are people making sure that they have at least some sense of autonomy? How is that? What is happening with that, with the lockdowns?
You know what I see, Kathy, or what I saw was that there was a leveling of the playing fields during COVID. That for many of the care partners who were feeling this loneliness, this helplessness, this boredom outside when they couldn't get to work, or those that were locked in with the elders, there was a leveling of the playing fields, and there was a restructuring of the power dynamic. Many of the elders started, becoming more involved in meaningful engagement throughout the home. And because everyone was on the same level and in the same boat, suddenly we saw a different kind of autonomy. And what I saw, for instance, in many occasions, is the reversal of roles, the reciprocity, the give and receive. This notion of, we're all in the same boat now. And
Right.
that showed a new level of autonomy, of really empowering elders to say, I can also take care of you. People got so close to one another
Mm.
during the pandemic, that it enhanced, I think, most of the domains of well-being. And again, I'm not minimizing the mental health fallout, but we must not, in my opinion, confuse the mental health fallout with a complete erosion of the domains of well-being. Um, you know, in this difficult time, I think people became aware of the deep seated need for the domains of well being, and how they can be affected, but also how they can be expressed in different ways. And I made a few short videos. Sadly, they're all in Afrikaans, asking elders, how did this affect you? How did it feel to be in solitary confinement in your room for 10 days? Um, and many of them said it was a time of deep reflection and deep contemplation. So I also
Beautiful.
believe that we should be very careful to not confuse solitude and reflection and contemplation necessarily with loneliness. It's a thin line.
Yes.
But if we ask elders, we hear a different story. And I think our ageist projection can be very dangerous when we do not really listen, acknowledge, honor the story of elders.
It looks like we have a few. Thank you so much, Rayne. That is wonderful. But I'm just realizing that there are a couple of questions in the chat, in the comment section. And let me see this. Steve Drennan is saying, thank you, Rayne. Wonderful to hear your perspective of well-being in South Africa. Do you have a perspective on safety and dignity and how it relates to well-being?
That's a very good question, because I often think that people also confuse safety um, with security. Of course, everyone wants to feel safe. Um, and Steve, I know where you come from. Um, so I think safety is one of those non-negotiables. Physical safety, creating a safe environment. It is non-negotiable. But again, it doesn't mean that people cannot have a sense of security when they are living in an environment like an informal settlement, which is not safe, where children cannot crawl because there's sewage on the ground. So I think, yes, we build on safety and security, creating a safe physical environment. But a safe physical environment does not equate to an elder feeling secure. Secure Security comes from a vocational sense of security, a spiritual sense of security, an emotional sense of security. If I may use the dimensions of wellness of Jan Montague, for whom I have huge respect. Safety and security is not just an environmental factor. Yes, it contributes. Yes, we have to try to make it as safe as possible, but it does not equate to what we refer to in the domains of well-being as security. Security is something that comes from inside. It again can be eroded, but as I say, physical, emotional, vocational, spiritual um, uh, security is as important as the physical safety of the environment.
It's great. Thank you. And Denise Hyde is saying, love how we all got in the same boat during the pandemic. How do we carry this forward and not go back to the previous way we lived? What advice do you have? The benefits, that you talked about, I'm sure she's referring to.
My crystal ball, I'll have to polish.
Yeah.
Denise, what I saw in the past 3 days, um, is is very encouraging to me, that I and this didn't come from me. This came from a group of about 25 people working in 11 different retirement communities up here in Johannesburg. Um, I think people have been shocked out of their comfort zone. They've had to relook at different ways of doing things. And I think the pandemic has been long enough, uh, like the 21 days of Alcoholics Anonymous, and other rewiring systems. I think it's been long enough for people to not ever want to go back to the way things were. Even the most hardcore of care partners uh, got to the point where they realized that residents and care partners can't go without hugging, without close and continuous contact.
Right.
So I don't have a theory about it. I don't have really evidence, but something in me says that this pandemic has been long enough, it has been severe enough to change the wiring in our brains, that we will never go back to the way things were. And that's for me the gift of the pandemic. It's brought people closer. It's humbled people. Um, in my research, I talk about a humble togetherness. We
Mm.
were forced to get off our high horse. We were forced to get in South Africa out of our uniforms. We were forced to get out of our roles, to get closer, even though it was physically distant. And I think because of the physical distance, we had to become very creative in how to reach people, how to connect, because it was no longer easy to just walk in and hug people. So I think it's been long enough to cause a permanent transformation, and we have to work on it now while it's still fresh in our memories.
It's wonderful. Do you have anything more that you'd like to say to close up? We're running out of time, and I've got a little announcement at the end. So if you've got anything more that you would like to say, I would love to hear it. You've been so fascinating today. You fascinate me every time I talk to you.
Yeah, I think my real passion is people living with neurocognitive impairment,
Mm,
and something that has become very, very evident to me is that we seem to have a different set of domains of well-being for people living with neurocognitive impairment, or what we used to call dementia. And I'm very determined that since the word dementia has been taken out of the DSM-5, we should stop using the word. Um, so for me, the challenge, and I think what we've learned during the pandemic as well, is that the domains of well-being apply equally to everyone,
yes.
and that people living with dementia, um, if I can quote Danielle Greenwood from Australia, saying that it is a basic human right. And whenever I hear myself, I think, "Oh, Rayne, just calm down." I'll change my tone of voice because I become like a preacher. Uh, the domains of well-being are not a nice to have. And yes, the Eden Alternative came up with it, but it's not an Eden Alternative um, um, construct. It is a basic human right. And
Yes.
how do we afford people living with neurocognitive impairment the same rights as everyone else? How do we acknowledge and create an environment where people living with neurocognitive impairment can also have autonomy and agency, which they do, which they deserve, and
Mm,
which we should honor?
yes.
And that's a very, very tricky one, and something that we need to be very introspective about. Do we honor, from a basic human rights point of view, the domains of well-being of people living with neurocognitive impairment? I'll stop there.
Well, I think that you've just created another show that we can do at another time together. We can talk
I'd
about
love
that.
that.
Thank
I'd
you,
love that.
Rayne. Thank you so much. You are so insightful. You're one of the most amazing and intelligent people I know. And I really appreciate you being here with me today. Part three, there's going to be your part two, and part three of this series called Well-Being Around the World is coming from Denmark. We'll be on Wednesday, October 6th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And that's 4 p.m. in Denmark, where we will talk with Karen Dahl and Osa Porsmos. Oh, let me say her name right. She taught me how to pronounce it. Porsmosa, our Eden Alternative regional coordinators from Denmark, and how they're doing there. And we'll explore the domains of well-being, of growth and joy with them. I've heard people say that Denmark is one of the happiest places on earth, and I think we're going to find out why. So thank you, Rayne, and thank you, everyone. And we will see you next time. Take care.
Thanks, Kathy.